And call George. Greg always tells me I need a big washcloth for this. You know what? I'm going to start one thing before we do this. Anybody in Vito's sponsorship family, please stand up. Thank you. I do that for one reason. If you don't have a sponsor and you don't have a sponsorship family, get one. Get one. It is the lifeline. It is the lifeline for me. It has been the lifeline towards a spiritual program rather than a self-centered George program. And that happened for me. I had a few sponsors, but back in 1997, Vito spoke at our convention. And I was sponsorless. And I had been sponsorless for a couple years. And I had sponsees that were ready to let me go. And actually one of them, my friend Willard, suggested I call this guy in North Carolina at the time called Vito. And I got his number, and he actually was looking for a new sponsor because I was sponsorless. And he got the number from Julie, who was living in North Carolina. And Willard didn't give up on me, though. And Vito came to speak. I didn't call him, but he came to speak. I was running the show.
Doing a good job.
But Vito came to speak, and spent some time with him that week, and went to the fireworks in Bay City, and listened to his talk, and was basically interviewing him. I had no idea. As I haven't had much of an idea most of my recovery until you shared with me. But a couple weeks after our convention, I asked him to sponsor me. And so a couple weeks from now, it'll be 15 years we've been in sponsorship. This man has helped me to develop a relationship with myself and with a higher power that I never understood possible. He has taught me areas of meditation and prayer that until him I didn't understand. I thought more of my meditation involved ego more than it did God. But he taught me how to remove that ego and set it aside. He shares with probably, and I don't know this, but I'm saying that he probably shares and has carried this message more than any addict in this fellowship. He travels this country, he travels this world, sharing his message of recovery with a still suffering addict. I didn't know that a year after I asked Vito to be my sponsor, my mother would pass away and how much I would need him. I didn't know that 6 years ago, because Vito, in part of his story, is he lost his wife to cancer, as I did 6 years ago, and how important that was going to be in my life. God gives us who we need in our life in this program. So without anything else, I will give you the pleasure of listening to one of my most wonderful friends and my sponsor, Vito L from Hollywood, Florida.
I'm an addict called Vito. Hi, family. Recovery, it's priceless. What a theme for a convention. MasterCard, eat your heart out. Before I get started, there's some thank yous that I need to get out of the way. One is to the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, because without you and rooms filled with people like you, I wouldn't be alive. I'd like to thank the convention committee for asking me to come and share. This is the third time since this convention has been going that I've spoke here. And when you get asked to come back, that's really an honor. Because people didn't want me back after I went anywhere for years. Even the damn dumpster I lived in, when I left it, somebody took it. And last but not least, most importantly, is my higher power, who I choose to call God or the source. Because without that relationship, I wouldn't be here either. Because all my life I had that something missing within me that I tried to fill with drugs, women, sex, power, money, jelly donuts, and never got filled until I walked in here, and it was filled through the spiritual process of the 12 steps. I'm not going to keep you captive and talk about a big drug-a-log, because everybody in this room knows how to use drugs. And some of your younger people know how to use drugs I never even heard of. I mean, down in Miami, we had this guy using bath salts, whatever that is, and he ate somebody's face off. You know, the only hungry I used to know is just get the marijuana munchies. Myself, I was a heroin addict, and that was my using, because I would go to my never land after I would use, and I would use every day. But I'm going to very qualify for very shortly my story, because I want to talk about solution, which is recovery. I started using in 1944, before many of you were born, before many of your parents were born, and some in here, your grandparents. I started off on the stoop of my apartment building in the Bronx at a very young age. First of all, it was being rewarded by the older guys in the neighborhood for being the neighborhood clown and doing all the errands for them. And they used to give me beer just to make me feel part of. And then me and the other young kids early in grade school start using something called Carbona. If you're not from New York, you probably don't know what Carbona is, but it's a form of dry cleaning fluid, and you dip your handkerchief in it, wring it out, keep it in your back pocket, and sniff it all day long, and the teachers would wonder why everybody in the neighborhood had a cold. By the time I was 10 years old, I was mainlining heroin and did what I had to do to support my habit. And every day since 1944 to 1956, I used on a daily basis. There was not a day gone by. And things were changing in my life, and I didn't know why. Now, one of my buddies that I used to run with, his father was super of a building, and in New York, what a super is, he gets a free apartment in the basement of the building, and so his family has the run of the basement. And so we used to play cards in this guy's basement. And we're sitting there playing our normal poker game, and one of our buddies was sitting in a chair at the other end of the basement playing his game called Russian roulette. And he won. He blew his brains out. And I knew there was something wrong with me from that moment on, because the only feeling I had, I was annoyed that we had to move the card game. Today, looking back, I know my feelings were froze. I didn't have the ability to feel. And I used like that every day. And in 1956, I was in a place called Orchard Beach in the Bronx. And in Orchard Beach, back in those days, it was segregated by neighborhoods. And everybody had their section of the beach. And if you wandered down the beach like a lot of guys wanted to look at the girls from the other neighborhood, there was always a gang rumble. And that day a rumble broke out, and we threw the pieces in the Long Island Sound, and the man was called, and I was going to get out of there before the cops come and bust me, so I was going to take off through these woods outside the beach and get on the other side of the woods to a place called City Island, where the bus goes back to the main part of the Bronx. And I run through these woods because I'm cool and I'm going to get away and let everybody else get busted, and I find myself in the middle of the New York City Summer Police Academy. Now, the rookies in New York back in those days wore gray uniforms to distinguish them from the regular cops. And I had all these gray guys coming towards me. And, of course, you know, I'm not going to get away from a deal like that in the middle of a police academy. So they get me and they put me in a paddy wagon, and they're taking me downtown to Manhattan to be arraigned in night court. I go before the judge, and he says I had to go be held in Bronx County until my court date, but it was too late to be transported back up to the Bronx, so they threw me in a jail in Manhattan called the Tombs. And believe me, it was Tombs. And I remember that night, I woke up in the morning, and that was the first morning that I didn't have a fix. And I started to shake in that cell, and they were time to take me up to Bronx County. And by the time I got to Bronx County Jail, I was already in full withdrawal, and I had to go through intake and all that stuff. By the time I got to my cell, I was laying on the floor, banging my head against the bars, trying to create pain up here so I didn't feel those razor blades in my belly. And I stayed in that cell for 30 days, and I detoxed in there. And I was called before the Bronx County District Attorney. And us addicts, for some reason, we know how to attract enablers to us. Because when I met with the Bronx County District Attorney, they offered me a deal. They said, Vito, if you would leave the state of New York, we'll offer you probation. Well, I'm not the brightest bulb on the street, but I also know when it's time to make an exit. So I said, of course, I'll move. I'll gladly leave the state of New York. And I moved to Jersey. Now, I moved to a place called Journal Square in Jersey City. And I picked Journal Square because that was the end of the Tubes. The Tubes is a subway that runs between Manhattan and Jersey. So, I got myself a furnished room there, walked downstairs, walked down below the ground, and take the subway into Manhattan on a daily basis. I honored my probation. I left the state of New York. I was no longer a resident. But the only difference was I was now clean. I cleaned up in that cell for that 30 days. And I said to myself, now I can be what I always wanted to be, a great dealer and a great gangster. I'll only use on weekends. And it did last for 2 weekends. But the second weekend never ended. It lasted until a 4 or 5 year blackout. And I don't remember much of what happened during that time, except sleeping on riverbanks and railroad tracks, winding up living in a dumpster because my using got so bad that I could no longer function properly. I couldn't even put a deal together, a scam together, or even steal right, that I had to live in a dumpster and strain hair tonic and mouthwash through stale bread to get the alcohol from it. This high-class heroin addict trying to struggle just to get a few drops of alcohol so I wouldn't get sick. And on February 14th, 1960, I crawled out of that dumpster. I was going to a place called Brick Church Station. It was a station for commuter trains into the city. And I figured I'd run some kind of hustle there, trying to get me a meal or something. And I collapsed in the gutter because I was that sick. And the snow was falling on top of me, and I was covered all over my body with snow. And people would step over me like I didn't even exist. And I think everybody in this room knows what it feels like to be a nun person when there's people all around you. People with just eyes would go straight up. They wouldn't even look at me, but they would step over me. And finally, somebody had some compassion that they went and they called an ambulance. And that was a big deal back then because there was no such thing as cell phones. You had to find one of these things called phone booths that are non-existent today. And then you had to drop money into it and call the operator because there was no such thing as 911 and get an ambulance. But somebody went through that trouble. And the ambulance come and they took me to the hospital and into the emergency room. And when I got there, it was the same story like it's always been in my life. The doctor said they wouldn't treat me. I was covered with body lice until the nurses deloused me. And after I was deloused, they said I was suffering from both infectious and serum hepatitis from dirty needles and dirty living. And my body had turned completely yellow. The whites of my eyes were yellow, and whenever body fluids came out of me, it was yellow. My liver was going. I was suffering from the 2 types of hepatitis, and I was very contagious. And they put me into an isolation ward that only medical staff could come in because of being contagious. And being an addict, of course, you always find the enabler. since I was admitted into the hospital on something called service, which is a pretty word for welfare, you don't get the best doctors. I got an intern who was there from Greece working in the hospital. And he would come in and he would talk to me, and we got pretty chummy. And when it was getting towards the end of my stay, when I was starting to lose the contagious part, he would say to me, the man comes here every now and then, they want to talk to you because of your living conditions and how you got where you got. And he can't come in here because you're contagious. However, you're going to be released from this isolation ward, and I want to offer you a deal. Now, when somebody says a deal to an addict, your ears get real big like Dumbo's. He says, we have a place upstairs for people similar to you. He didn't say like you. He said similar to you, and that should have been the giveaway. And if you would sign these papers, maybe society will forget about you. Well, like I said, I'm not the brightest street lamp there is, but it was still winter, and I don't have to tell you what March is like up in this part of the country. I knew it was cold out there. I knew my dumpster was probably gone by now. So I signed the papers, didn't know what to expect. And so the nurses came in and got me, and I'm wearing one of these green hospital gowns. And I had my worldly possessions in a brown paper bag. And we get on the elevator, and we took it up to the 7th floor. I'll never forget that. And the door opens up, and there's this big room with bed after bed after bed. And I said to the nurse, what is this place? Now, this was before the days of detox and rehabs. I said, what is this place? And she looked at me and she says, this is an alcoholic ward. And I looked at her with my indignation. You're going to put me with them damn sick people? They can't stop drinking. And she says, well, you're an addict. I said, no, you're crossing the line there. I'm an abuser. I'm not an addict. I can stop anytime I want to. And she said, why don't you? I said, because I don't want to. Many of us have been in that position. So she said, you can take your brown paper bag and you can leave if you want. Well, like I said, I'm not a fool. It's cold outside. So I said, okay, I'll go, but I'm not going to mingle with any of those people because they're pretty sick. Now, with an alcoholic ward, which is different than what a detox is today, it was nothing more than a drying out place. These guys would come in there, they'd hang around for a month or so, play cards, until the weather warmed, and then they'd go back out. So I wasn't going to deal with them because they had a problem. So I get myself a bed way in the back of the room. I don't want to be bothered with these people. Well, two things happened to me in that facility that changed my life, and that's why I'm standing here today. One is I got friendly with an old man there. Now, I'll use that word old cautiously because I was 21 and he was 40, and ask any 21-year-old, 40 is old. I'd like to go backwards, believe me. And this guy, when you rap with him, you could talk with him about anything. You want to know about God? He was on a first-name basis. Back then, we were having the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and I know some of you younger people have no idea what I'm talking about. But he could break the Iron Curtain. He knew everything about everything. And so I gravitated towards him. You know, today I know why. He was a know-it-all, and so was every other damn addict. That's why I gravitated towards him. The second thing that happened to me was a fellowship came in once a week, and they carried a message of something. And I told the nurses immediately that I wasn't going to those meetings because those people are too damn sick, and I don't want to be exposed to that. I had enough of my own problems. And she said, well, if you don't want to go to those meetings, you don't have to. Take your brown paper bag and leave. It's still cold. So I decided to stay. And I would go in, I'd lean against the wall, my foot up there, back there, because, you know, addicts, when we come in, well, especially male addicts, you always got to have your back covered. I wasn't going to let anybody get behind me. And I would sit there and snicker under my breath when these people would be talking about their drinking problems. But then one day it was time for that old man to be released. And he went into the back room to put on his street clothes. And when he came out, he had holes in his shoes. His pants had holes in them. He had a pea coat on with the elbows out. And I looked into that man's eyes. And I realized that he was a street bum. This man would get off on Sneaky Pete, Muscatel, Thunderbird, Gallo, any of that cheap stuff. And Sterno too. And I looked into his eyes, and I finally realized by looking, there wasn't much difference between me and him. He got off with all that stuff, and this high-class heroin addict would get off on any damn thing I get my hands on. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was Sterno. It didn't matter if it was hair tonic. Because I had to use no matter what, no matter how poor the conditions were. And so from that point on, I started to listen to these people. And I got by their identification in a deeper level of feelings. And when it was time for me to leave there, they told me the magic words that every homeless person needs to hear. If you come to our meetings, we have coffee and donuts. That's a pretty big invite when you're homeless. And so they gave me this meeting list. And the first day I got out, I ran to a meeting because my dumpster was gone and I had to find a place to sleep. At least I'd have some warmness and coffee and donuts. And I walk into this meeting. Now I have hair down to my butt. I have a Garrison belt on that's razor sharp, just in case for fighting. I have spikes coming out of my boots. And I walk into this meeting of the other fellowship. Now this is 1960. Every man in there had a jacket and tie on. There was very few women in there, and that's how they dressed in that fellowship back then. And I walk in with the earring dangling and the long hair, and it's like watching a black and white movie that stops. Because there was no movement. It seemed like for eternity. And then finally one guy walked up to me and he said, "What do you want, kid?" And I said, "I just got out of this hospital. They gave me these meeting lists, and they said I could come here and get coffee and donuts." And he said, "The coffee and donuts are in that corner. But this is a closed meeting for Alcoholics Anonymous, and people like you don't get better. You have a disease that is immoral and illegal, and you can't come here, but help yourself to coffee and donuts." And he took my meeting list, and he circled meetings that were called open meetings, and said, "You could go to these open meetings, but don't even waste your time, because people like you just don't get better." One thing you don't tell an addict is not to come back. And I would show up at these great big open meetings, and when I would sit down, everybody would move to the other side of the room. I wasn't contagious anymore. But it was just a cultural shock. I mean, today we see people with pink hair and things in their noses and their teeth. Well, to them, that's how I looked. That's how different, because I was part of that new culture coming out with the long hair and the earrings hanging down and the spikes out of the thing. And so I guess I scared them. Thank God for Narcotics Anonymous. No matter how you come in here, nobody gets scared. But they would shift to the other side of the room, so I had plenty seating. Sometimes on the airplane, I wish it would work that way. But what was happening in 1960 was that more and more people like me, that looked like me, begin to come into that fellowship. And you know, we shared deeply with each other outside the meetings. We would stand there like this. "Hey man, what's happening?" Go to the meeting, sit there, not a word, leave the meeting. "See you tomorrow, dude." But we knew there was some connection between us because we seemed to, just the feeling. We looked alike. We just had that certain look of the streets. And I was sitting in a meeting of the other fellowship, and I think it was 1962. Dates are very fuzzy at this point in my life. I'll be 80 in 7 years, so give me a break. But some guy comes up and taps me on the shoulder by a nickname that I had gotten in the couple years that I went there. And they said, "Hey, animal, there's a drug meeting in the back room." Now, I had no idea what a drug meeting meant, but it sounded interesting. So myself and the herd of animals, we go to the back room. When we got there, there was a bunch of hippies for people old enough to remember the Love Children of the 60s. They had long hair too, and they wore T-shirts. There was a difference though. Our T-shirts weren't quite clean. Our hair was sort of greasy. Our skin was sort of greasy. They were clean. They were a little bit different than us. And at that time, there was what they called rabbit meetings that traveled around the country. There were no permanent meetings. And this bunch of hippies had to be out of San Diego, California. And they caught a bug out there called Narcotics Anonymous. And when they would travel to commune, and I know the younger people here have no idea what a commune was, but I know there's some old hippies in here. Remember how everything was free then? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But they would rent the back room of the other fellowship, and they would carry this message of Narcotics Anonymous. And the literature wasn't like it is today. They were an off-colored white book, almost beige. And they would open up the meeting, and they would start to share. And all of a sudden, I started hearing my thinking coming out of somebody else's mouth. Now, you got to remember, I sat in recovery for almost 2 years, and I couldn't share, and I was listening to drunkalogs because I had to go to these big speaker meetings. And all of a sudden, I'm in this small, intimate group, and I'm hearing my thinking coming out of their mouth. And from that day on, I knew I was not insane, which I always thought I was. And I knew that I wasn't the only person in the world that was thinking like because I didn't think anybody thought the way I thought. If you knew how many people I killed in my mind, and if you knew how many millions I made in my mind, you're addicts, you know what I'm talking about. Just like all the movies we made. But I heard my thinking coming out of somebody else's mouth, and I knew I would never be alone, never again. And then some of the locals that I hung with, that we didn't really talk to each other, started sharing, and I started hearing my thinking coming out of their mouth. And I knew I found a place. And when the hippies moved on, we tried to keep meetings going. We had some problems. In the metro New York area at that time, there was something called Rockefeller laws, where 2 or more addicts couldn't congregate together under any circumstances unless you were under a government authority of some sort. Welfare department, social services. Methadone hadn't even come out yet. Later on, you could get together in the methadone line. So we had some trouble getting things to going. And so I had to go to that fellowship for a while, but we tried to start NA meetings, and we had no recovery. We just didn't know. We had clean time, we didn't have recovery. And then in Passaic, New Jersey, I found a meeting called Narcotics Anonymous. It wasn't this fellowship, it was a preceding fellowship. It was a fellowship started in New York in 1948 by a person called Danny Carlson. And he had a sidekick called Ray Lopez. And Danny had died in the 50s, but Ray was still alive, and she had these meetings in Passaic, New Jersey. And they can get around the Rockefeller laws because they were in the auspices of the Board of Health and Social Services. They had the steps, but they did not have traditions, so they could take outside money. So I would go there, I would go to the AA fellowship, but while we were going to the AA fellowship, me and the gang of crew that I hung around with, for one reason, we were looking for addicts to proselyte them. We were going to bring them and help us form this NA stuff. And we met these 2 guys, and we spotted them as addicts by just looking at them. And so we cornered them and said, "You guys use, don't you?" They said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "We're only here with the drunks because we're told we have to come here." I says, "Well, good." I says, "Do you know anything about recovery?" He said, "Oh, we graduated." I said, "You graduated?" He says, "Yeah, one guy came out of a new facility in Manhattan called Daytop, and the other out of a new place called Phoenix House, and they were in there for 90 days, and they said they graduated." They knew everything there was about recovery. They'd help us with this NA stuff. So we got a meeting going, and we said, well, we got clean time here. We got a few years clean, but how do you do this recovery thing? Because we don't really know. They said it's simple. They taught us how to do it in this Phoenix House in Daytop. When somebody shares something sick, everybody gang up on them and confront them. This was the days of confrontation therapy and rehab, when you shaved your head and wore diapers. I mean, they don't do that anymore. They follow the Hazelden model, but back then it was called the Synanon model. And it was all very confrontation. And they said, so when somebody comes to the meeting and they're sharing some real stupid shit, confront them. Well, these guys graduated. We had to take their advice. So we start confronting these people, and chairs go and tables fly, and that wasn't the answer. But I had kept in contact with one of these hippies who had gone back to San Diego, and I used to call him up once a week. And he would say to me, well, and I'd complain, yeah, we ain't got NA here, blah, 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 blah. He'd say, well, why don't you come out to San Diego? We got some of that going on here. I said, but you don't understand. I just can't leave the East Coast and go to the West Coast. I got a living to make. And his answer was, what are you talking about, Vito? You don't work. I said, no. Now, back in those days, in the 60s, if you had a problem called addiction or alcoholism, they used to classify you as disabled, and you'd get a welfare check, 2 of them a month. So the state would send you 2 checks a month. I'd get my checks, I'd go to the pool hall, and I'd play 9-ball all day long and parlay my money. And I said, I got a job. I collect welfare and play pool. He said, well, we got welfare in California, and we got pool halls too. So I decided I'd take the gamble, and I'd go out to San Diego. So I started hitchhiking cross country. I remember I left on a Wednesday, and I got there the following Wednesday. It took me 8 days to get there. And when I got there, I found the phone booth, and I called the guy, and I said, I'm here in San Diego. He said, where you're at? And I told him where I was. He said, I'll be over to pick you up in a few minutes. Just hang right there. And so he pulls up with his little Volkswagen bus with the peace signs on it. Remember them? And so we go to his pad. He lived in Old Town, San Diego. And we hung out in his pad, and people coming in and out all day. And he says, you're in luck. It's Wednesday. We got 2 meetings in San Diego, Wednesday and Friday, and tonight's Wednesday. So about 6 o'clock, guys start coming over. They're looking for the ride, and we all pile in this Volkswagen bus. And we go to a place called Mission Hill. And we get on top of Mission Hill, and big Catholic church. We pull in the parking lot. And I'm getting out of the meeting. He grabs me by the arm. He says, now, Vito, when you get in the parking lot of the church, do not mention Narcotics Anonymous or NA. I said, why? We're going to an NA meeting. He says, yeah, but the priests don't know it. They don't rent to any addicts. They think we're the other fellowship. So when I hear addicts say they can't get a meeting place, I laugh at them. I mean, we did it when nobody would rent to addicts. The only other meeting we had on Friday night, and our landlords did not care about who we were as long as we paid the rent. We met at the Black Panther Clubhouse. They had a room, they rented it to us. But see, the rest of the week, we had to go where we had to go. But those of us who went to NA, we stuck together like glue. Because we knew there was a difference. Now, here's where I have to get honest and tell on myself. Now, I got a few years clean now. I don't have a sponsor. I never worked a step. Because my attitude was, first of all, I'm not going to ask a sick person to sponsor me. Because I was weller than anybody else in the fellowship. I was unique. We get a few people in today that think that too. And I never worked any damn steps. Because only sissies work steps. But in the meantime, people coming in after me, and they're getting better, and I'm still jonesing on a daily. Now, I shouldn't use the word Jones, because I know the younger people don't know what Jones means. Oh, they do? Okay. So that word's still in existence. I jones on a daily basis, and these people are going on with their life. So I figured maybe NA has something about this sponsorship and steps. So I asked this guy, I said, would you sponsor me? He says, yeah, I'll sponsor you. Where are you with the steps? Well, I wasn't going to tell him that I never worked a step. I'm not honest yet. I never had a sponsor. I said, I'm done with them. I've heard them read every night for a few years. Vinay. He said, okay, you're done with the steps. Tell me about the first step. Well, I said, that's simple. I'm powerless over drugs. My life got on. He said, whoa, where does it say drugs in the first step? Look at this little off-colored book, and He said, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. I said, addiction, drugs, what the hell's the difference? He said, I'll tell you what the difference is. Drugs is what you put in your body. Addiction is that funny looking thing between your ears. I said, what, me? He says, yes. And you never worked a step. I said, how would you know that? I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West. He said, anybody that comes to a meeting and says that I am a drug addict, alcoholic, cross-addicted, dope fiend, junkie, heroin addict, has never worked. I said, well, isn't it an honest program? This is who I am. He said, from this moment on, I want you to identify as an addict only. Not drug addict, as an addict only. Because what you're doing is putting the blame on everything else. Your family, the drugs, the chemicals. And from that day on, I identify myself as an addict only. Because that's my disease. That's what I suffer from. The getting and using and putting drugs in my body is a symptom of my disease. My disease is a disease of attitudes, of negativity, of not wanting to deal, or running away from life on life's terms. The getting and using is just to make me feel comfortable that I can live with that miserable SOB that lives in my head. And then he explained to me that the first step where we admitted we were powerless over our addiction and our lives had become a manual was the things of my past before I stopped using, and the things of my past that I brought into recovery. And the next 10 steps, not the next 11 steps, would become my future if I chose to use them. And he told me when it said I admitted I was powerless, the word admitting was only part of it. It was a 3-part process. Because how many of us admitted we had a problem before we got clean? Yeah, I got a problem, so what? So when you admit, the next thing that you have to do is accept what you admit. First I admit, then I accept that I was powerless, and then I surrendered to the fact of what I accepted. So saying I admitted I'm powerless over my addiction means nothing. We all said, oh yeah, I'm powerless. We admitted it. We have to go to a deeper level. We need to admit it, then we need to accept internally what we just admitted, and then we have to surrender to it. And then we can move forward. You see, you can't stay on the first step very long. First of all, you have to realize you're not powerless over everything. I know I hear people say, I'm powerless, over everything. You ask me to go turn that light switch on, I'm not powerless. I can walk over there and do it. If you ask me to go out and look for a job, I am not powerless. I can do it. I'm powerless over the disease of addiction, not over everything. But you see, I gain power through the next steps. But not power of my own, is power of a spiritual power. And that's why we have to surrender in the first step and move on. If we stay on that first step, we're in big trouble. It's like taking all of our clothes off and walking out in the front of the hotel and standing in that parking lot naked. You're going to see some flashing lights before long. And that's exactly what happens when we become powerless and we don't move on to the second step. Because the second step is like putting on new clothes. We came to believe that a power greater than us could restore us to sanity. And that's when I had to sit down and get real serious with my sponsor and educate him. I said to him, that's for the rest of the people. We'll move on to 4. We skipped 2 and 3. And he said, what are you talking about, dummy? That was his favorite word for me. He always called me dummy. I don't know why. And he said, what are you talking about? What are you being so dumb for, dummy? And I said, but you don't understand. I'm not like you or anybody else. I'm an agnostic. There was silence for a couple moments. And he said, oh, yeah? Why are you an agnostic and not an atheist? Well, nobody ever asked me that question before. Usually when you say I'm an agnostic, there's silence and nobody says anything from that point on. But he had to go ask a question. And so I had to go into my infinite wisdom, talk for a few moments, and said, just in case someday I die, you ask any 21-year-old if they're going to die, they're never going to die. I said, but just in case I die someday, and there happens to be this thing you call God, I want him to know that I was just an agnostic. I wasn't one of them damn atheists. Because agnostic is somebody who doesn't say there's not God, but says, I don't know. Probably he's not one. And he just looked at me and said, you're a damn chicken atheist. Damn sponsor calling you chicken. And he said, anyway, dummy, there's no such thing as an atheist. I said, don't tell me there's no such thing as an atheist. I've been to meetings. I've heard people say, I'm an atheist and I don't do the second and third step. He said, well, they're full of it. I said, what do you mean they're full of it? He said, you ask anybody who says they're an atheist if they believe the sun's going to be up tomorrow. And tomorrow night the sun's going to be and it's going to be dark. Well, I said, of course, the sun comes up every day and goes down. That's the way the universe works. He said, that's right, dummy, good orderly direction, G-O-D. He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 is somebody who goes to a church and has a religious thing. A 1 is somebody who just believes that tomorrow's going to come. He says, and in between are all different things. He said, even the one who just believes tomorrow's going to come believes in something. So there's no such thing as an agnostic. And he says, anyway, dummy, you don't meet God till the third step. We're on the second step. He said, don't dope fiend me. I said, I go to meetings to hear people talking about a power greater than themselves and a higher power in the same breath, and he said they're wrong. He said, in your addiction, you had a power greater than yourself on a daily basis. How many mornings did you get up and say, I am not going to use today? And within 5 minutes, you were cooking up and shooting up. That's a power greater than yourself, but a negative power greater than yourself. I used against my will many days. And I know people sitting in here have used against their will. They said, I don't want to do this anymore. 5 minutes later, they're doing it. That's a power greater than yourself, but it's negative. But in recovery, a power greater than yourself is anything that restores you from the insanity of doing it over and over again, and this time it's going to be different. And sometimes that could be something somebody shares, something you find in the literature, something even an earth person may say to you. Because you know those earth people are always trying to tell us, well, if you just didn't use, you would be okay. What's wrong with your willpower? But every once in a while, an earth person says something profound. But he looked at me and he said, and for you, dummy, a power greater than yourself is pain, because if it hurts enough, you're willing to change it. And I found that to be true for many, many years. Not so often today, but sometimes. If it hurts, I'm willing to change it. You know, I keep putting myself in the same situation. You know, nothing changes. Mary's name becomes Nancy, and then Joan, and then Barbara, but it's the same damn girl in a different body. You know, insanity, doing it over and over again. You know, in many other parts of my life, I hate my job, but I get a job worse than that one. You know, when it hurts enough, I'm willing to do it different. And that's what the second step is all about, being restored to insanity, seeing how insane it is. I was so insane that I knew the outcome of my actions and I did it anyway. You know, so I had to learn to play it forward, to see what the results were going to be. When I was going to do something, I really needed to see not how I felt, but what the results were. You know, when the love bug bites you, nothing's ever going to go wrong, and you're on that high and so forth. You need to stop and see, is the love bug just bite me? Is that the same person I was just in a relationship with a different name and body? That's being restored to sanity. You have to play it forward. And he said someday, even if God, he said, well, no, what he said to me, he said, God is not going to open the sky and send down angels to fix you. It'll always be through people, places, and things. And he said, even someday, if you get to believe in God, because you have your right to change your mind in recovery, he won't come down and send angels to fix you. Then it was time to go on the third step, and we all know that third step has that word G-O-D, and I said, I'm not going to do it. He said, read the step. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. He said, what was the last thing you said? I said, God as you understood him. He said, why doesn't that say God as we understand him? I said, I don't know. Understand, understood, what the hell's the difference? He said, well, let me tell you a story. He'll always tell me a story. He said, I'm going to tell you when these steps are written in the other fellowship, why it doesn't say as God as we understand them. All right, give me your spiel. He said, well, if that said God as we understand him, that would mean the fellowship would have an understanding of God. If it said we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand it, it would mean Narcotics Anonymous would have an understanding of what God is. But by changing the word to understood, it means when you walk in here, you can have your own understanding of God. You don't have to have an understanding like anybody else's. And that's why this fellowship works for everybody. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hinduism, it doesn't really matter. Because it's God as you understand him, because the fellowship only has a God as we understood him. And that understood is that we understood that you can have your own understandings. And he told me I had to begin to make a decision. And I told him I don't know how to make a decision. I don't even know what a decision means. He said, get a dictionary and look it up. And a decision is making a commitment. And I know a lot of people go to the basic text and says, well, you just have to make a decision, but they don't read 2 lines farther down that says, where it talks about a decision is a commitment. You see, so when you make a decision, you're making a commitment to make that effort to turn your will and your life over. You know, you all heard the story of the 3 frogs, and boy, I hate when I hear that story. And I'm not prejudiced against frogs. But you get these old timers that go up to a newcomer and say, there are 3 frogs sitting on the log. 2 of them jumped in. Which one's made the decision? And the newcomers always say the 2 that jumped in. Old timer in his wisdom say, no, you're wrong. It's only a decision. All 3 of them made it. 2 made a decision to jump. 1 made a decision to stay. Well, damn it, I think that's totally wrong. Because the 2 that jumped in, they got to shore. The other one starved on that log. So making a decision means to make a commitment. To turn your will and your life over to the care of God. And what is your life? What happens to you on a daily basis? And what is your will? Your reaction to what happens to you on a daily basis. The 3rd step is simple if you break it down. I made a decision to take everything that happens to me in my life to turn it over to God. My life and my will. And my will is, hey, I'm not going to react to it. Because as addicts, we have something called reactionitis. And what is reactionitis? When I was a little boy, and my mother took me shopping to a place called Woolworth's 5 and 10 that most people in this room can't remember, and I wanted a toy, and my mother said no, I would lay on the floor of that 5 and dime and bang my head on the floor until the manager would come and say, would you damn buy him the toy or we'll give him one? Made such a scene. That's called a reaction. I didn't get what I wanted, so I go on to display. Well, as addicts, we do that all the time. Your relationship breaks up. Boom, you want to go out and use. You come out in the morning, your truck is repoed. You want to go out and use. You see, we always react. And what the 3rd step, the biggest power of the 3rd step is to teach us how to respond. If we take that 5 or 10 or 15 seconds to respond rather than react, half the time we wouldn't go out and use. You know, we had some wisdom when we were young and in school, and parents would say, count to 10 before you open your mouth. What they were trying to do is to teach us to stop reacting and respond. Think it through. Because I'll tell you, it's a hell of a lot harder to come back and get clean than it is after you're already in the first time. You know, so the whole idea is stay. Because it's not as easy coming back the second time. You really got to work your butt off to get clean again. So why not? So the whole process of the 3rd step is respond. Don't react. Think it through. The 3rd step is very powerful. The first 3 steps will keep you clean for a while. It's really the foundation of recovery because the other steps are built on top of it. But it will keep you clean for a while, but not for very long. Because it's not okay to be physically clean and spiritually dirty. And there are people in this program with lots of time who are spiritually dirty. I had a sponsee once that used to take his tent and pitch it outside a detox and wait for the women to come out. And he had a few decades clean. That's called being physically clean and spiritually dirty. Steps 4 through 9 will clean you spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And that's why they have to be done. Sure, you can stay clean physically for a while on the first 3 steps, but you won't stay here for the long run. Or if you do, the quality of your recovery is not going to be very well. You'll be on the verge of relapsing all the time. Fourth step said we made a searching and fearless moral inventory. And I asked my sponsor, what is morals? He said, get a dictionary and look it up. Damn him and his dictionary. And, I looked it up, and he said, go ahead and start writing on it. And 24 hours later, I called him up and said, I'm done. And his answer was, Vito, if you wanted to go to the Catholic Church to confession, you should have told me. I would have dropped you off. But the fourth step is not a confession, it's not a history, it's a searching and fearless moral inventory. And what he told me I needed to do, and he gave me, we didn't have a fourth step guide back then, and we were given topics like relationships and resentments to write on and so forth. And he said, what I want you to do is go back into your diction, to the best of your memory, and write how you feel when this history was being created. Get in touch with the way you felt when you were doing it. And when you finish writing it, I want you to go back and start writing again about how you feel about the same things today. One will tell you who you were in your addiction. The second writing will tell you how much you've grown. Because in recovery, what happens a lot of times, we begin to grow. People around us see it, but we don't even know it. So when we start writing that fourth step and we write the second how we feel about the things we did today versus how they were, we can even see that we were growing. And we need that little push to know that we are getting better. Because sometimes, because we're sitting there and challenges happen in our life and things happen, sometimes we say, what are we doing wrong? We may not be doing things wrong at all. We may be dealing with those things and they feel uncomfortable, and that is okay. It's okay to find out you've been in a relationship with somebody all through your addiction, and now that you got clean, you don't know that person and don't want to be there. It's okay to get clean and find out you're not happy in the job you've been in for the last 25 years. They're uncomfortable feelings, but we have those feelings because we're getting better and we're willing to challenge those feelings and grow with them. It will also tell your sponsor who you are, who you were, who you are, and where you need to go when he does a fifth step with you. In the fifth step, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I was living out in San Diego at the time I did my fifth step, and I had my sponsor. We made an appointment to meet at a place called Chula Vista. It was halfway between San Diego and Tijuana. Back then it was just rolling desert. Today it's all housing developments. But we were sitting on some rocks, and I had all these writings that I did, and I don't know how many months I wrote. And I figured, my sponsor is now captive for the next 24 hours. And I pulled this stuff out and started to read, and he said, you ain't reading any of that damn stuff. Of course, I got resentful right away. And he said to me, the whole idea of your writing was to introduce Vito to Vito. Now what I want you to do is look at what you wrote and start talking about it, not reading it. Because see, what I want to know is what's inside of you, the exact nature. Don't tell me that you have an anger problem. That's surface stuff. I want to go inside and know why you get angry. That's the exact nature. Don't tell me that you're jealous and you can't stop following your old lady around. I want to know why you're jealous, the exact nature. You see, and that's what we talk about. You look at your notes. This is your life. This is the thing. Now, let's talk about why you're that way. Don't read your story to me. I don't care how many times a day you get angry. I want to know why you get angry. You see, that's the healing therapy of the fifth step. To get inside to the exact nature, not the surface stuff. We all have anger problems. We all have jealousy problems. We all have self-centeredness. We all have greed. We all have selfishness. But why are we that way? See, that's how we start to heal. And isn't it funny how the sixth step follows the fifth step? We were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. And this is when this agnostic says to his sponsor, is this where I get on my knees and God takes them away? And he said to me, you get on your knees if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing in the step that says God takes them away. It says Vito became entirely ready to let the process begin. It's a step of willingness. It's a step of getting ready. It's a step of preparing yourself to have them removed. And I said, well, then how do you remove them? Well, before we got to that, he explained to me the difference between a defect and a shortcoming. A defect is part of who I am. It's part of my character. A shortcoming is acting out of the defect. So there was a difference. And there's a difference between the 6th and 7th step. The 6th step is like packing your suitcase. The 7th step is taking the train. So you have to know there is a difference, and people seem to lump them together as one. And he told me to take a piece of paper like this. Draw a line down the center. On the left side of the line, he said, you identify and write down all the shortcomings and patterns that we identified in the 5th step. On the other side of the line, just opposite each one of them, you write the opposite. Anger, serenity. Jealousy, tolerance. And then he said you prioritize them. The ones that are giving you the most trouble, you put at the top. And you work at one at a time till it's under control. You don't use a shotgun effect and work a little bit on this one. You take one down, use a rifle effect, work on the one, and move to the next. And then it's time to go to the 7th step. We humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. He says, is this where you get on your knees and pray? And again, he said, you can if you want, but that's not what the step means. I said, well, what does the step mean? He said, any addict becomes humble when they own their own stuff. That's how you can tell a person when they're getting better, when they stop playing the blame game. When they own it and they take care of their side of the street, that's becoming humble. And then God can remove the shortcomings through the power of the first 3 steps. And what do I mean by that? Now, whatever I'm sharing with you is my personal experience, because I have nothing to share with you but my experience. And at that time in my life, I wanted to be in a relationship so bad, and I was new in recovery, and I had one shortcoming that was totally destroying any relationship I get in. Used to hear men talk about it in the rooms. I don't even hear them talking anymore. Maybe the world got better, but I don't think so. I suffered from mad, violent jealousy. And even a female addict is not going to stay in a relationship with somebody who's abusive physically and mentally. And my sponsor told to me, when that jealousy started to come, I had to go down to the first step. I had to take the elevator down to the first step. And I had to admit I was powerless over that feeling of jealousy. Not deny it, not try to push it away, but to embrace that feeling of jealousy. Feel it through every fiber of my body. Feel my body shaking and trembling from that feeling of jealousy. And then going to a second step and see the insanity if I act out on how I'm feeling. And then go to a third step and take all those feelings and turn them over to the care of God as I understood them. Praying for the power to go back to a second step and do it different. I'd like to say it disappeared overnight. But after a period of time of using it, I haven't had that problem in 40-some years. And you do that in each one of your shortcomings. The only thing my sponsor didn't tell me is when you clean your act up and get rid of all your defects and shortcomings, you find out you have a whole bunch of new ones. So if you think you're going to go through the 6th and 7th step one time, you're in for a big surprise. But you know it's good. As long as you don't have the same mistakes in the future as you have now, that means you're getting better. Progress, not perfection. Then it was time to go on to the 8th step, where we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Well, I informed my sponsor with my infinite wisdom, I'm not willing to make those amends, so there's no sense making a list. He said, read the step, dummy. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make. He said, you make the list first. The step says so. Okay, I'll make the list, but I'm going to show you I'm not willing. They all owe me Christmas presents. If they didn't do what they did, I wouldn't have did what I did. God, we're so justifying us addicts. So I made the list. And being an addict, we have this personality defect that, we're not going to do something, and then we do it anyway in spite of ourselves, and then we want to go out and make amends to the whole world. And he said, whoa, put the brakes on. You need to go over your list with me. I need to be because in the 9th step it tells us we made direct amends to such persons whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or other. And he said, I don't want you going around making amends that are going to cause more damage than the original. You don't walk up to your grandmother and say, hey, Grams, you remember when your diamond disappeared? Hello. That would cause but you're not free. You still have to make amends anonymously, financially. And then what about those 2 people that We meet in the night. They're in our lives seconds, microseconds, days. We don't even remember who they are. Like two ships passing in the night. We still have to make those amends. But we have to make them through our higher power because we don't even know who the people are. And if our higher power feels we need to make a direct amend to those people, guess what? They show up in your life. I've had people show up 15 and 16 years later, and when they were there, I knew why they were there. I couldn't have handled those amends at that point in my recovery, and they came into my life when I was ready for them. There's no coincidences in this program. And what about the last part about it that says others? What's others all about? To such people, when they accept to do so, would harm them or others. What does that others mean? Well, I wouldn't walk into the 46th precinct in the Bronx and say, do you remember in 1956, at front of PS 118 on the corner of 179th Street and Arthur Avenue, there was a gang stomping there, and somebody may have lost their life. You got any cold cases I could help you with? I'm sure they would walk me to Sing Sing. You see, the best rehabilitation that you can get is to change your life. Going back to jail is an insane thing. And I hear addicts say, well, I did something 20 years ago and I'm going to turn myself in. Are you insane? Change your life. Become a better person. That's the rehabilitation. Society can't do that for you, but Narcotics Anonymous can. So 4 through 9, we cleaned up spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And 10 through 12 are the maintenance and the growth steps. We maintain what we got through the first 9 and grow on top of them. And 10, 11, and 12 we do daily for the rest of our life. And when there's something that needs to be done in the other, 10 will take the elevator down to where we need to go. And if we're working 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, we'll never have to go through the steps 4, 5, 6 times. We'll work the steps over, but the elevator will take us down to what we need to do. In the 10th step, it said we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. And that doesn't mean walking around saying I'm sorry and suffer from sorryitis. When we take daily inventory, what a daily inventory is reflecting my day, reflecting everything that happened in my day. That's what the inventory is about. People talk about the IP and so forth. That's all good. But the whole idea of the 10th step is to reflect what happened in your day. And when you were wrong, promptly admit it. And what that means is not saying I'm sorry, although you can go out and say you're sorry. But what that really means is self-honesty. When I was wrong, I see it in my reflection and not make that same mistake over and over again. Because in recovery, it's okay to make mistakes, but it's not okay to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. That's called manipulation. I'm an addict. What do you want from me? We do that reflection, that daily inventory. When we're wrong, we get self-honest. Yes, if amends, if we need to apologize to somebody, that needs to be done. But before we do that, we need to admit to us that we were wrong, because how can you make amends to somebody else if you're not even admitting it to you? And that's the beauty of the 10th step. For 17, 18 years, I did a written 10th step. I do not do a written 10th step anymore. Because of the fact that I did it so often before my head hits the pillow, I do that daily reflection and see where I was wrong and talk about not doing it in my program anymore. It's very important to maintain my recovery to the 10th step. And I still do it on a daily basis, except I don't write it. The 11th step, which I consider almost like a cornerstone, even though it's not at the bottom, I believe, because without the 11th step, I can't maintain my recovery. It said we sought. What does we sought mean? It means we're seekers. Don't let anybody tell you any different. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And if you get upset with me using God, well, I hate to tell you, God's mentioned, I think, 4 times directly in the steps and 3 times indirectly. He was here first, so talk to your sponsor. And if God drives you out of these rooms, addiction will drive you back. So it says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. So it's telling us we should have had that conscious contact before, because it doesn't say to start it, it says to improve it. So from the 3rd step on, we should have been working, trying to improve it. And then it goes on to say, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us. Well, I'll tell you, when I was a newcomer and we go to functions and we were up all night long drinking coffee, us young NA philosophers with 90-day clean would discuss what God's will for us was. You know, I look back now, it was so insane, but that's where we were, and that was really a good thing. It got us thinking. But I had a sponsor that once told me, because that was the perplexing part of the 11th step, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us. What, do you got a direct communication line? God, what's your will? Okay, talk to you tomorrow. My sponsor said to me, whenever there's a situation in your life, what you need to do is step out of the box, detach yourself emotionally from the situation, and become an observer, and look at that situation and ask the question, what is the highest good for everybody in that situation? Without your emotional attachment. That will always be God's will for you. That's why the last part of that step says something very profound. It says, and the power to carry that out. To carry what out? God's will. Because once we know what God's will is, the self-centeredness of our disease says, well, I don't like that. I should pay her child support? Well, if you knew what a BC was. But God's will is the highest good for everybody. You get out of the box. What is the best thing for everybody? What's the best for your children? What's the best for her? That's all part of God's will. Then you got to pray like hell to carry that out because your disease says, no, she's a B. She don't deserve that. If she wasn't messing with him, that's not your business. Your business is to do the right thing for the right reason. And that's the power of the 11th step. And summing up the steps says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. What does that mean, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps? Well, what that means through my experience was, these steps work. That's a spiritual awakening. And I know there are people here going through challenges and say, what do you mean the steps? Look, my wife left me after 30 years. She's been going out with this guy for 10 years, and I don't know anything about it. How the hell is the steps going to get me through this? Well, the steps is the answer because working the steps will get you through the challenge to the other side without picking up and using, and that's why the steps are always the answer. Will it take the challenge away? No, but it'll help you get through that challenge to the other side. And that's what it's about. It's about me. It's about you, not about the other person involved. It's about me living my program, working steps to get through the challenge. It doesn't matter if that person was the worst person on the earth. It's my side of the street I got to keep clean. I don't care how dirty the other side is. I live on my side. And so I need to have that spiritual awakening to see that the only answer to everything is the 12 steps. And then the step goes on to say, we tried to carry this message to addicts. Try to carry what message to the addicts? That the steps work. You know, I hear people talking about H&I meetings and going into rehabs and everything. Well, the real message is, the steps of Narcotics Anonymous will get you through any problem you don't have to use. That's what carrying the message that the steps are. You want to go into a rehab and tell them how tough and dirty and mean you were and how slick you were and everything that you used. That's not carrying the message of Narcotics Anonymous. That's carrying the message of disease. You tell them about how you got through all that stuff, and it's the 12 steps. That's the hope. We talk about our experience, strength, and hope. We give the strength from the steps so that we can give another person the hope that I can get through it again. Because everybody in this room, when they were new, you felt like a piece of turd. Everybody felt. We come in, and you don't understand, I'm different than you. And the hope that you get that, no, I was just like you. I felt like a piece of turd, and I don't feel that way today. That's how the hope comes. That's the thing. We carry that message to other addicts. And then it further gives us a mandate. And that mandate, what it says, is to practice these principles in all our affairs, which means we don't graduate. I'm still a sick and suffering addict, and I act out on my disease, and I need to practice it. Because if I stop practicing, you know what I'm going to be? I'm going to be living in that damn dumpster again. The disease is arrested just for today, but it's alive and well inside of me. And it can come out with that monster at any time. And if I don't practice these principles in all my affairs, I'm just another sick, suffering addict out there trying to get through the day using. And I can't do that. So I'm going to end it up now with a little story. Because I know I kept you captive here, and I don't want to keep anybody captive. There was this guy called Joe Attic. Many of us have known Joe. Joe's a pretty slick addict. You know, he's out in the street. But Joe was so slick that he always had his stash to cook up in the morning and a pint of Jack Daniels put under his pillow so that when he got up in the morning, he'd take that swig of Jack Daniels, his hands stopped shaking, he could cook up and shoot up. Well, Joe was out at a little party with some of his using friends, and he met this little filly. She come up to him, and she just rubbed up against Joe, and it felt so good. Joe hadn't been with a woman in a long time. And she said, Joe, if you just get me a little something, I'll get you a little something. Well, Joe was getting a little horny by then. And he says, well, yeah, I got a little stash. I'll share it with you. So Joe gets his little pint and his little stash of his heroin, and he goes and he shares it with her, and they use it all up. And then she says goodbye. He gets nothing. He goes home that night with no stash for the morning. Oh, he's just like, oh, well, I got took again. He goes to bed, he gets up in the morning, and he's starting to shake a little bit, and he reaches under, oh no, I don't have my Jack Daniels anymore. I can't. I got to go out and I got to make something happen. You know how we get up in the morning when we got to make something happen? Joe gets up in the morning and he's thinking and he's in the fog. I got to make something. He throws on his jeans and his t-shirt and he's walking down the street trying to figure what kind of a hustle he's going to make. Some damn city worker, those damn city workers, they just pain the ass. Left the manhole cover. Down goes Joe, 15 feet below ground. Starting to go in detox now. He's shaking. He's going, oh my God, the dragons of hell are on my butt. There's no place for me to go. I just wish I was dead. This disease of addiction is just awful. He hears some footsteps up above, and he says, oh, rescue. The voice goes down, what's going on down there? Joe said, I'm Joe Attic, and I'm dying from the disease of addiction. The dragons of hell are here, and I just want to die. Man says, you got no problem, son. I'm a man of the cloth. And he pulls out his Bible, and he starts praying over Joe. And he says, Joe, and he says, now God's going to take care of you. And off he goes. Joe says, this guy nuts? People have been praying over me all my life. They don't want me up in the manhole. And he's going on, and he's just going thinking, he's banging his head, and he just wants to get either out of there or used or something or just die. He didn't want to feel. He hears more footsteps. Guy says, what's going on down there? I'm Joe Attic, and I'm dying from the disease of addiction. The dragons of hell are on my ass, and I just want to die. Voice goes down, well, you're in luck. I'm an MD, and I got my prescription pad. I'll write you out a little Suboxone, a little Oxycontin, a little Percocet. Oh, we'll throw some Dilaudid in too, Joe. You'll be okay. He throws the scripts down. Joe says, this man insane? Now I got all these scripts, no way to get out of here. Now it's double hell. Can you imagine an addict with scripts and no way to get them filled? Forget about what they tell you in church. That's hell. And finally, he hears more footsteps, and a very faint voice with just a touch of a Scottish brogue says, what's going on down there? And he says, I'm Joe Attic, and I'm dying from the disease of addiction. I got prescriptions, and I can't get them filled, and I just want to die. All of a sudden, this guy just jumps down in the manhole cover. And Joe says, what the hell, are you crazy? We're two of us trapped down here. He says, no, Joe, we're not trapped. My name is Jimmy Kinnan. I founded Narcotics Anonymous. I've been here. I know the way out. Thanks for letting me share.